Okay, so here we're going to talk about factors affecting thinking and braking distance. So we've seen the data that we've been looking at for braking distance and thinking distance and stopping distance. And I told you that data is from the highway code and it's for what we call the average person. Okay, but we're not all the average person, we're not all the same. And thinking and braking distance is going to actually be different for different people, slightly, okay, and for different cars. So what sort of things affect the thinking and braking distance? So you may want to stop the video here and have a little think about that yourself, the sort of factors that affect thinking distance. But once you've done that, we can have a look at the things. So here we go. Here are the things that affect thinking and braking distance, okay? So thinking distance. Now your thinking distance, the only thing that affects your thinking distance, well actually there's two things that affect your thinking distance, okay? The thinking distance, if I take this out of the way for a minute, we know that the thinking distance is equal to your speed multiplied by your thinking time. So distance equals speed times time. Now, so your thinking distance is going to be affected by two things, your speed and your reaction time. Okay, thinking time is the same as reaction time. Now, under normal circumstances, your reaction time is pretty much constant. Okay, so that doesn't really change most of the time. So generally speaking, the only thing that affects your thinking distance is your speed. But different people have different reaction times. And the other thing is this, your reaction time can be affected by certain things. So there are two things that affect thinking distance. Number one, speed, and number two, your thinking time or your reaction time. So the higher the speed, the bigger the thinking distance, okay? And you can see that here. The greater the speed or the velocity, the greater the distance travelled during your reaction time, okay? So the reaction time generally stays constant for a particular person, but the faster you go, the bigger distance you travel within that time taken to react, okay? So that's what that's saying there, all right? Now, your thinking time, though, or your reaction time can be affected, and your reaction time can actually become larger than normal, okay? It can increase. The bigger the reaction time, the worse it is for thinking distance, okay? And you've got to get your head around that, because often we think, bigger is better. But actually, if you want to have a small thinking distance, which is desirable, the smaller your thinking distance, the better, because the quicker you're going to hit the brakes. If you want a small thinking distance, you need a small reaction time. So the smaller your reaction time, the better. But this can be increased, which then makes your thinking distance bigger. How can it become increased? Well, if you're tired, you're not going to be thinking so clearly. Okay? If you're distracted, so distractions could include lots of people in the car talking to you at the same time. Okay? Trying to answer your mobile phone or whatever the case may be. Those are distractions that are going to increase your reaction or thinking time. If you've taken some drugs can affect your reaction time, okay? If you drunk alcohol, obviously that will change your reaction time as well and inhibit it. It will increase it actually, and that will make your thinking distance greater. So that's why it's illegal to drive when you've taken illegal drugs. Okay, certain drugs that you might be given in the hospital also might stop you from driving, but that's not often the case. But illegal drugs certainly will affect your reaction time. Alcohol will affect your reaction time, and that's why you're only allowed to drink a certain amount of alcohol and legally still drive. If you're tired, if you're distracted, those are the things that will affect your reaction time and your thinking distance. And obviously the speed affects your thinking distance as well, but does not affect your reaction time. So you need to know the different things that affect the thinking distance, and you need to know why they affect your thinking distance. So you may be asked to explain things that affect your thinking distance. You'd need to say, if I've drunk alcohol, that increases my reaction time, which will increase the thinking distance. So there's usually a three-part answer to this. You state what it is that's affecting the thinking distance, explain how it affects your thinking distance, or why it affects your thinking distance, perhaps I should say, and then explain how it affects your thinking distance. So the thing that affects it is the drugs, why it affects it is because it increases your reaction time, and how it affects it is because it obviously makes your thinking distance longer. Now, braking distance, okay, braking distance, if you remember, it's all to do with the conversion of kinetic energy into heat, Okay, so it depends on the amount of kinetic energy your car has, and it also depends on how easily you can convert that kinetic energy into heat. And the conversion of kinetic energy into heat basically relies on how good your brakes are. Okay, so there are two things that affect braking distance basically. Number one, the braking force. Okay, and number two, your speed. Okay, because the higher the speed, the more kinetic energy you've got, and therefore the more kinetic energy needs to be converted into heat, and that takes longer to do, and therefore you're going to travel further. And the braking force, the better your brakes, the stronger your brakes are in terms of the force they apply, the quicker you're going to stop. Now the braking force also is affected by your tyres. Okay, there's two parts to the braking force. Number one, there's the force between the brake caliper and the brake disc. So often you'll see sports cars have these huge brake calipers, which means they have really big brake pads, which means they can apply a big force to your brake disc. Okay, these sort of brakes are much better than the standard sort of brakes that you'd find on my car. Okay. The other thing is you'll see that there's lots of holes in the disc as well. Okay, and that helps the disc to be cooled, and that obviously helps it then to convert kinetic energy into heat more quickly. The other thing then is this: your tyre. In order for you to have a large braking force that's going to slow your car down effectively, you need to have tyres with good grips. Okay, and that's why it's illegal to have tyres with less than 1.6 millimeter of tread on them. You can see the tyres have like grooves on them, and those grooves have to be at least 1.6 millimeters in depth. Otherwise, your car is going to be illegal, and you will get, I think it's 3 points on your license for each tyre that is below the correct tread depth. Now, the tread is actually used to disperse water when you're driving in the wet. Okay. So, what's going to affect your braking force? Well, the things that affect your braking force are these. Number one, the condition of your tyres. Okay. Number two, the condition of your brakes. Okay. The brake pads wear down over time, so when you take your car to be serviced, you may need some new brake pads. And actually, the brake discs themselves become damaged over time. They get worn down. So you may need those replaced as well. So if you've got brakes that aren't working effectively, that's going to affect your braking force. If you've got tyres that aren't renewed at the correct time, you're not going to get a good braking force either. So the condition of your tyres, condition of your brakes. Also, if it's wet, that means that you don't have so much force between your tyres and the road. There's less friction, so that's going to affect your braking force. If it's icy, again, that reduces the braking force because there's less friction. So all of those things decrease the braking force due to the effect they have on friction. Okay, and obviously the speed affects your braking distance because, as we said before, when you double your speed, if you double your speed, the kinetic energy of the car will actually quadruple, and that means you've got 4 times the amount of energy to get rid of, and that means that you're going to have 4 times the braking distance. Okay. We say that when we convert energy from kinetic energy into heat, we say that we're doing work. You'll learn more about this later in a future topic. Work is done when we convert energy from one form to another. So we say that the faster you're going, the bigger your speed, the more kinetic energy your car's got, so the more work needs to be done by the brakes converting kinetic energy into heat. And therefore, it's going to take a bigger distance to slow the car down. Okay,